Did you know that Cleopatra was actually Greek, not Egyptian? Or here's a fact that might break your brain. She lived closer to the release of the first iPhone than she did to the construction of the Great Pyramids. Welcome to Fantastic Facts. Let that sink in. For a moment, that civilization was already ancient, long before its most iconic queen took her first breath. But that timeline? That's just the warm-up. The ancient Egypt, the Hollywood version, is a spectacular lie. It is a glossy fiction, hiding a reality so disturbing that most textbooks won't even touch it. So, fasten your seatbelts. We're about to peel back the bandages on real history, and trust me, it is darker, weirder, and far more fascinating than any movie you've ever seen. Let's start by toppling the biggest monument in your mind, Cleopatra. When that name is mentioned, what pops into your head? A seductive, dark-skinned woman with sharp cat-eye makeup, walking out of the desert, with the blood of pharaohs flowing through her veins. Sorry to ruin your dream, but Cleopatra was white as a sheet. She wasn't Egyptian. She was Greek, of Macedonian descent, specifically. A descendant of Ptolemy I Soter, one of Alexander the Great's most trusted bodyguards. Imagine it this way, to make it easier to understand. Cleopatra's family was like a bunch of European colonizers, ruling over a foreign land and absolutely refusing to integrate into the culture. The Ptolemy dynasty ruled Egypt for 300 years, and they were so arrogant that they refused to learn the Egyptian language. They lived in a bubble of Greek culture, speaking Greek, eating Greek food. Right in the heart of Alexandria, for 3 centuries, the kings of this lineage considered the language of their subjects to be inferior. But Cleopatra was different, and this is why she became a legend, not because of her beauty. She was the first and only ruler in her family to bother learning and speaking fluent ancient Egyptian. She didn't do it because she loved the locals, but because she was a genius politician. She understood that to control the crowd, you have to speak their language. She branded herself as the incarnation of the goddess Isis to manipulate religious belief. So the next time you see a movie casting a person of color as Cleopatra and shouting about African pride, remember that actual history is much more complex and ironic. She was a white Greek woman, intelligent, ruthless, and better at self-promotion than any reality TV star today. The story of Cleopatra leads us to another shocking truth about the monumental structures she inherited. You've heard this story 1,000 times. The pyramids were built by the sweat and blood of millions of slaves, people who were whipped on their backs, dragging stones under the scorching sun, until they dropped dead. This image is very cinematic, very tragic, and completely wrong. If you went back to the past and told a pyramid builder that he was a slave, chances are you'd get whacked in the head with a chisel for the insult. The truth is, the pyramids were built by professional workers, people who were paid a decent wage and even had better benefits than modern office workers. If judged by the standards of that time, archaeologists have found the village of these workers. Near the Giza complex, what did they find? Bones of cattle, sheep, and goats. In massive quantities. These people ate meat every day, a luxury that the common Egyptian populace of that time could only dream of during festivals. If they were slaves, they would have only been thrown a few crusts of dry bread to stay alive. No one bothers fattening up slaves with premium beef. Furthermore, excavated skeletons show signs of complex surgeries like setting broken bones, and even primitive brain surgery. And importantly, they survived and healed from those injuries. This proves they enjoyed a national-level healthcare system. Why would a pharaoh spend money curing slaves? No, they were curing engineers and skilled craftsmen. Building the pyramids was like the Mission to Mars project of ancient Egypt. It was national pride. The work crews even gave themselves very frat boy names and carved them into the stones, like the drunkards of Menkaure or the friends of Khufu. They worked for glory. for the religious belief that they were building a resurrection machine for the god king, and of course, because they were paid handsomely. But what were they paid with? Coins hadn't appeared yet, and paper money was a distant dream. The answer is the divine liquid that humanity still worships to this day: beer. But hold on. Don't imagine the cold, fizzy bottles you drink at the pub. Ancient Egyptian beer was a thick, soup-like gruel, sour, and low in alcohol, but incredibly nutritious. It wasn't just a recreational drink. It was the blood of the economy, the basic unit of currency. Try to picture a society running on beer. You go to work, and at the end of the month, your boss doesn't wire money to your bank, but hands you 50 jugs of beer. You take that beer to trade for clothes, meat, or jewelry. Beer was so important that they had a tiered wage system based on beer. Builders got a few jugs a day, foremen got more, and high-ranking officials got entire warehouses of it. Beer was even considered an essential food item for the whole family, including children. It sounds like child abuse by modern standards, but in an era where the Nile water was full of bacteria and parasites, a fermented and boiled drink like beer was much safer than plain water. It provided calories, vitamins, and killed gut bacteria. It is no exaggeration to say that the pyramids were built not on the backs of slaves, but on rivers of beer flowing ceaselessly. Life for the Egyptians sounds pretty chill, building tombs, eating beef, drinking beer, and worshiping gods. But their death was a completely different story. A story more gruesome and brutal than any horror movie we all know about mummies, about wrapping them in white bandages. But the process behind it, especially how they handled the head, is what will make you shudder. Ancient Egyptians were obsessed with preserving the body, so the soul could return. They kept the heart, lungs, liver, stomach, intestines, all carefully pickled and put into sacred canopic jars. But there was one organ they considered useless trash: the brain. In their worldview, the heart was the seat of intelligence, emotion, and the soul. And that slimy lump inside the skull? Just something that produced mucus. Nothing more. Therefore, when a person died, especially the nobility, the embalmers would perform a procedure called brain extraction. They didn't crack the skull open, as that would ruin the face. Instead, they used a long metal hook, smashed the ethmoid bone in the nose, and shoved it straight into the brain. They whisked it around until the brain turned into mush like tofu, then turned the head upside down so that the gooey mixture would flow out through the nose. Whatever was left inside would be cleaned out by pumping in strong wines and corrosive chemicals to dissolve the rest. Imagine that scene: a corpse lying on a stone table, and workers diligently picking the nose of the dead to drag the brain out and throw it away like medical waste. The irony of history lies in the fact that the very brain they threw away was what figured out how to build the pyramids. Yet they worshipped the heart, a simple blood pump. While the embalmers were busy with brainless corpses in gloomy temples, out on the streets, social order was maintained by equally bizarre methods. You think ancient police used dogs to catch thieves? Too basic. Ancient Egyptians played a bigger game. They used baboons. That's right. You didn't mishear. Fierce baboons with long fangs and unpredictable tempers were trained to become police officers. Imagine you are a thief sneaking around the market of Thebes. You snatch a purse and run headfirst. Suddenly, from behind, it's not the sound of a dog barking, but the growl of a primate weighing several dozen kilos rushing at you. Jumping onto your back and baring sharp teeth at your neck is a real-life nightmare. Ancient reliefs have recorded scenes of security officials walking baboons on leashes on patrol, and even scenes of baboons capturing criminals. Egyptians worshipped this animal for its intelligence and ferocity, but turning them into security officers was truly a breakthrough move that even the modern world hasn't dared to try again. Speaking of baboon police, has that freaked you out enough yet? If not, look in the mirror and run your fingers through your hair. Because if you lived in ancient Egypt, the first thing you'd do every morning wouldn't be brushing your hair. It would be shaving it all off. We often see Egyptians in movies with long, glossy black hair, intricately braided, adorned with gold and jewels. But that is another spectacular visual lie. The naked truth, quite literally, is that most of the upper class, both men and women, were as bald as an egg. Why would a civilization that worshipped beauty choose the hairstyle of a monk? The answer lies not in fashion, but in an enemy small in size, but scarier than any invading army: lice, in a land hot as a bread oven. Lice were an epidemic. With no Head and Shoulders shampoo and no bug spray, the only and most radical way to stop these parasites from nesting on your head was to eliminate their habitat. Egyptians were obsessed with cleanliness to an extreme degree. They believed hair was dirty, a haven for evil spirits and disease. So, they shaved everything. Shaved heads, shaved beards, shaved arms, shaved legs, shaved every single thing that could be shaved. What are those flowing locks we see on statues? Those are wigs. After shaving their heads bald, they would put on wigs, made of real human hair, usually bought from poor farmers or slaves, or horsehair and vegetable fibers. Then plaster them with tons of beeswax and perfume. Wigs not only made them look fancy, but also acted as a thermal insulation helmet, protecting their bald scalps from the scorching desert sun. The irony is, they shaved their real hair to avoid lice, but those unwashed wigs eventually became lice nests themselves. But at least when a wig got infested, they could throw it into the fire and buy a new one. They couldn't exactly throw their own heads away, and once the hair was gone, the face became the center of attention. You've definitely seen the signature Egyptian makeup style: thick, black eyeliner extended sharply, like a cat's eye today. We call that a smoky eye for hitting the clubs. But for ancient Egyptians, that was advanced biotechnology. They didn't wear makeup to seduce anyone. They wore it to survive. That black powder they smeared on their eyes was called kohl. It wasn't a cosmetic product you'd buy at Sephora, but a chemical mixture concocted from galena, a lead or mixed with animal fat and soot. Modern science, upon analyzing coal samples found in tombs, had to tip its hat in respect. The lead compounds in coal, while toxic if eaten, actually stimulated the body to produce nitric oxide when applied to the skin in small doses, a substance that boosts the immune system. The Nile River was teeming with bacteria, causing conjunctivitis and eye diseases, and that layer of black powder acted like a topical antibiotic, killing bacteria before they could invade the eye. Furthermore, the black color of coal helped absorb sunlight and reduce glare. It's like how American football players paint black stripes under their eyes today. So, Cleopatra, or the Pharaohs, didn't line their eyes to be vain. They were wearing sunglasses with built-in eye drops. To fight against the harsh nature, men, women, children, everyone wore eyeliner. If you didn't, not only were you ugly, but you were also flirting with the risk of blindness. Speaking of women, we have to pause for a moment to smash another stereotype. When thinking about women in the ancient world, we usually picture them as victims, property, sold by parents, despised by husbands, spending their days weaving indoors. This was true for Greece or Rome, the cradles of Western civilization, where women were considered second-class citizens. But in Egypt, absolutely not. Ancient Egyptian women were the true boss ladies of the ancient world. They enjoyed freedoms that Western women had to fight for thousands of years to regain. Egyptian women had the right to own private property, buy and sell land, sign economic contracts, and even sue men in court. They didn't need a male guardian hovering over them, but the most shocking thing was the right to divorce. While in many other cultures, Women were discarded by husbands just for not bearing a son. In Egypt, women had the right to kick their husbands out of the house if they felt unhappy, and they were very fair about it. Archaeologists have found ancient marriage contracts that clearly stated, "If you leave me, or I leave you, you must compensate me with X amount of silver and provide child support." That is the ancestor of the modern prenup, used by the super-rich today. They viewed marriage more pragmatically than we think. It was an economic and emotional partnership. If it didn't work, dissolve it, split the assets, and go separate ways. Of course, men still held the highest positions in government, but compared to their sisters in Greece, Egyptian women lived like free queens. The autonomy of Egyptian women was also evident in a very delicate and sensitive aspect: birth control. You think contraceptive pills are a 20th century invention? Egyptians were handling family planning 10 years ago. The only thing is, their method might make you lose your appetite. And maybe that's how it worked? One of the most common contraceptive recipes recorded in ancient medical texts, like the Kahun gynecological papyrus, was mix honey with fermented crocodile dung. Don't vomit yet. Look at it from a scientific perspective. People rolled this horrific mixture into small pellets and inserted them into the woman's vagina before intercourse. It sounds disgusting, but chemically, it made sense. Crocodile dung is highly alkaline. It acts as a natural spermicide by changing the pH level in the vaginal environment, preventing the sperm from meeting the egg. Honey acted as a mechanical, sticky barrier. Of course, the efficacy wasn't 100%, and the risk of infection from the bacteria in crocodile poop was extremely high. But it shows that Egyptians understood the mechanism of conception and tried to intervene with whatever they had on hand. They were willing to shove poop into their bodies to avoid having more kids. That is a level of determination modern people can hardly imagine. Additionally, they used gauze soaked in acacia gum, which when fermented produces lactic acid, a main ingredient in modern spermicidal gels. They were the craziest and bravest chemists in history, but if you think using crocodile dung for contraception is the peak of weirdness, you haven't met Pharaoh Pepi II? This king ruled Egypt for a record-breaking time, allegedly 94 years, ascending to the throne as a 6-year-old boy and ruling until he became a senile centenarian. As he got older, Pepi II became more eccentric, and one of the biggest obsessions of his life was flies. In a tropical country full of organic waste and river water, flies were a specialty. They swarmed faces, crawled into noses, and landed on food. Commoners would wave their hands or use fans, but Pepi II was a god king. He couldn't waste energy shooing flies. What was his solution? He ordered slaves to strip naked, smeared them entirely with honey, and made them stand around him. These poor slaves turned into living fly traps. The flies, smelling the honey, would swarm the slaves and leave the king alone. Imagine that scene: a powerful old man sitting on a throne, surrounded by motionless humans covered in sticky honey, and thousands of black flies buzzing and feasting on their skin. It was sophisticated cruelty, a testament to the fact that when power is absolute, one can turn fellow humans into tools, cheaper than inanimate objects. Pepi II may have lived a long life, but the legacy he left behind wasn't greatness, but the image of honey slaves, standing in silent suffering to buy peace for a cranky old king. If you're standing in front of the great Sphinx of Giza, the first thing that smacks you in the face isn't the majesty of the lion's body, but that flat face, missing a nose, and immediately, your brain pulls out a classic anecdote that history teachers or tour guides often tell. It was Napoleon Bonaparte. The story goes that when Emperor Napoleon brought his army to Egypt, he got annoyed or just wanted to show off, and ordered his soldiers to fire cannons at the Sphinx's face for target practice. It's a great story, very fitting for the aggressive nature of a conqueror. But sadly, it is a blatant slander. Poor Napoleon has been wrongly accused for centuries. The truth is, sketches of the Sphinx made by Frederick Louis Norden in 1737, a full 32 years before Napoleon was even born, show the nose was already missing. You can't shoot off something that isn't there. Unless Napoleon knew how to time travel? So who was the real vandal? The answer lies in the documents of the 15th century Arab historian al-Makrizi. The culprit was a man named Muhammad Shah Alder, a fanatical Sufi Muslim living in 1378. At that time, Egyptian farmers, despite having converted to Islam, still held on to old superstitious habits. They brought offerings to the Sphinx to pray for a good harvest and for the Nile to rise. Sahim Aldar saw this and went into a rage, considering it blasphemous idolatry. In a fit of holy anger, he climbed up and chiseled off the Sphinx's nose. To destroy its divine power, the vandal's ending wasn't great either. He was caught by the locals and executed right at the Sphinx's feet. So, the missing nose isn't a scar of Western gun warfare, but a scar of internal religious conflict. The Sphinx has silently witnessed it all, and perhaps it breathed a sigh of relief that at least Napoleon didn't shoot off its ear, too. Leaving the dusty Sphinx, let's step into the entertainment world of the Egyptians. You think modern people are the only ones addicted to games? You think pulling an all-nighter to rank up in League of Legends is a 21st century specialty? Big mistake. Ancient Egyptians were humanity's first hardcore gamers. They were obsessed with board games to the point of madness. And their hottest title of all time was called Cenote. This game appeared from the very first dynasties and lasted for 3,000 years, so popular that everyone, from the powerful pharaoh to the mud-stained farmer, played it. King Tutankhamun was even buried with 4 Cenote sets, so he wouldn't be bored in the afterlife? But Cenote wasn't just a time killer like Monopoly. Over time, it mutated into a life-and-death religious ritual. The Cenote board symbolized the underworld. The pieces moving on the board were like human souls, overcoming obstacles in the afterlife, to reach the field of reeds, their paradise. Egyptians believed that luck in this game wasn't random, but was the protection of the gods, Ra, Thoth, Osiris. If you won, it meant the gods were favoring you, and your soul would be safe after death. Conversely, if you lost, your soul's fate was pretty dark. Imagine the pressure of playing a board game where the spectator is the Grim Reaper, and the prize is the salvation of your soul. No wonder they were so addicted. It was a survival game, in the literal sense. Even with divine protection in the game of Cenote, in real life, Egyptians still had to face a brutal, persistent, and unbeatable enemy, desert sand. We often marvel at statues of pharaohs with mysterious smiles and perfect teeth. But in reality, the smile of an ancient Egyptian was a smile of pain. Dental disease was the most terrifying silent killer of this civilization. Mummies of both royalty and commoners show catastrophic dental conditions, teeth worn down to the pulp, jaw abscesses, severe gum disease. The reason wasn't because they ate too much candy, but because their food processing technology was too primitive. Their main staple was bread. To make bread, they had to grind wheat using sandstone querns. During the grinding process, stone chips and desert sand, which is everywhere, got mixed into the flour. As a result, every piece of bread they ate daily was like a piece of coarse sandpaper. Imagine chewing sandpaper for your entire life. Sand and stone dust wore down the enamel, exposing the sensitive dentin and pulp. Bacteria attacked the pulp, causing infection, leading to abscesses and sepsis. In an era without antibiotics, a rotten tooth could be a death sentence. Powerful pharaohs could command tens of thousands of people, build skyscrapers. But they were completely helpless against the tiny grains of sand, grinding away their lives from inside their mouths. Amenhotep III, one of the greatest kings, spent his final years in constant agony because of his wrecked teeth. Speaking of great kings, we cannot fail to mention Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great. He is famous as a mighty warrior, a great builder, and a supreme braggart about his military achievements. The peak of Ramses' career was the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittite Empire. In his temples, Ramses had giant reliefs carved, depicting him alone on a chariot, fighting heroically, destroying thousands of enemies, and winning a glorious victory. If you believed Ramses' performance report, you'd think he was a Marvel superhero. But modern archaeology has exposed the truth. The Battle of Kadesh was actually a draw, and the Egyptian army was almost wiped out, had reinforcements not arrived just in time. After that inconclusive battle, both sides were exhausted and realized that fighting forever would solve nothing but waste money and lives. So, in 1259 BC, Ramses II and the Hittite king Hattusili III put pen to paper on a historic document, the Treaty of Kadesh. This is recognized as the first international peace treaty in human history, recorded in detail. Its content was extremely progressive, including clauses on non-aggression, military alliances against third-party enemies, and even the extradition of political criminals. A copy of this treaty is currently hanging solemnly at the United Nations headquarters in New York, as a symbol of the desire for peace. So, Ramses' greatest legacy isn't the fake victory he boasted about, but the handshake of peace he was forced to make when he couldn't beat his opponent. Sometimes, peace doesn't come from goodwill, but from the stalemate of war. And finally, let's talk about the brightest star in the universe of pharaohs. The name everyone knows, Tutankhamun, or King Tut. If you ask an average person who the greatest pharaoh was, they will say, King Tut. Why? Because his tomb was full of solid gold. His mask is the icon of Egypt, and his curse haunts the world. But prepare for a harsh truth. Historically and politically, King Tut was a C-list pharaoh. He ascended the throne as a 9-year-old child, ruled for 10 short years, and died at 19 without achieving anything significant. He didn't expand the borders, didn't build great monuments. Most were claimed by his successors, and his reign was dominated by regents. Even King Tut's body was a genetic disaster. Due to the royal custom of incestuous marriage, his father and mother were full siblings. Tutankhamun had severe birth defects. He had scoliosis, a clubfoot that made it impossible for him to walk normally. He had to use a cane. Over 100 walking sticks were found in his tomb. He also had a cleft palate and suffered from malaria. The image of a young, heroic king on a war chariot is just ancient Photoshop. In reality, he was a sickly young man, hobbling around, who died from terrible health complications. So, why is he so famous? Simply because of luck. His tomb was located in an obscure spot, in the Valley of the Kings, and was buried under rubble. From the construction of another pharaoh's tomb, Ramses VI, while the tombs of truly great kings, like Ramses II or Thutmose III, were visited and stripped clean by tomb raiders ages ago. King Tut's tomb lay silent, under the debris, completely forgotten. When Howard Carter found it in 1922, it was nearly intact. The massive treasure we see was actually just the standard burial package for a pharaoh who died young. Imagine how much wealth the tomb of Ramses the Great must have held. If it hadn't been robbed, King Tut's fame is a classic example of being in the right place at the right time. He is famous, not because he lived a great life, but because he died in a well-hidden spot. If the story of the sickly and lucky King Tut hasn't surprised you enough about the medical standards of that time, let me introduce you to an invention that would make 21st century obstetricians tip their hats in respect. It's the pregnancy test. You think the two-line stick is a product of modern biotech? Wrong. Egyptian women knew how to check if they were bun in the oven 3,500 years ago, and their method sounds absolutely bananas. But the results were frighteningly accurate. Here's the process. A woman who suspected she was pregnant would urinate into 2 bags, one containing barley and the other containing wheat. Then she waited. If neither bag sprouted, sorry, you're not pregnant. But if one of them, or both, sprouted, congratulations, you're going to be a mom. Furthermore, they believed they could predict the gender. If the barley grew first, it was a boy. If the wheat grew first, it was a girl. Sounds like baseless folklore, right? But hold your laughter. In 1963, modern scientists tested this method and were shocked to find that its accuracy in determining pregnancy was up to 70%. Why? Because the urine of pregnant women contains high levels of estrogen, which stimulates plant growth incredibly well. Although the gender prediction part was completely bogus, the fact that they knew how to use the biological reaction of urine for early pregnancy diagnosis was a move millenniums ahead of its time. While medieval Europe was still diagnosing diseases by looking at the color of urine or tasting it, Egyptians were conducting actual biological experiments from tiny seeds. Let's zoom out to look at the most colossal structures, the pyramids. What image do you have of the pyramids? Yellow-brown stone blocks. Rough, dusty, blending in with the desert sand, looking like old artificial mountains. That is just the skeletal remains left by time. If you had a time machine to go back to when the Great Pyramid of Giza was just finished, you would be literally blinded. The original pyramid was not earth-toned. It was stark white and sparkled like a giant diamond under the sun. Its outer casing was made of fine white Tura limestone, polished to a mirror finish that reflected the blinding sunlight. And on the very top, the Benbon stone, plated with gold or electrum, a gold-silver alloy. Imagine, in the middle of the vast desert, 3 white towers piercing the sky, tipped with golden fire. It wasn't just a tomb. It was a spiritual lighthouse, a giant optical machine asserting the pharaoh's power. As the representative of the sun god Ra, it is said that the light reflecting from the pyramid could be seen from dozens of miles away, like a star fallen to earth. So, where is that glamorous cloak now? It was looted. In the 14th century, a massive earthquake loosened the casing stones, and later, Islamic sultans dismantled that precious white limestone to build palaces and mosques in Cairo. What we see today is just the rough, naked core. Like a house with only the brickwork done, but no paint. The external glamour of the pyramids contrasted sharply with the tragedy occurring inside the bloodlines of their owners. We often hear about royal blood, or noble blue blood, for the pharaohs, to keep their divine bloodline from being diluted by inferior mortals. They implemented a marriage policy that we now call incest. Brother married sister. Father married daughter. They mimicked the myth of the god Osiris, marrying his sister, Isis. The goal is to concentrate power and divinity. But biology doesn't care about mythology. Biology only cares about genes. The consequence of centuries of inbreeding was horrific: genetic degeneration. The kings and queens of Egypt, instead of being picture perfect, were actually full of genetic defects. Akhenaten, the heretic king, possessed an elongated skull, hips wide like a woman's, and a potbelly, traits of Marfan syndrome or other genetic disorders. And the peak was Tutankhamun, whom we mentioned. He was the product of a marriage between a full brother and sister. He had a cleft palate, a clubfoot, bone necrosis, and a weak immune system. An entire great dynasty eventually collapsed, not because external enemies were too strong, but because they destroyed their own genes from the inside out. They wanted to be gods. But in the end, they created the most sickly and deformed humans on Earth. Is the expensive price of extreme purity. But the madness in their beliefs didn't stop at marrying sisters. Let's talk about their pets. You keep dogs. Cats. Too basic. Egyptians kept crocodiles, and not in a zoo. They kept them inside temples, worshipping them as living gods. In the city of Crocodilopolis, yes, the city was literally named Crocodile City. People worshipped the god Sobek, the crocodile-headed deity representing the power and fertility. Of the Nile, in the main temple, priests selected a giant crocodile, named it Petsuchos, meaning son of Sobek. This flesh-eating monster lived a life more luxurious than any of us. It wore gold earrings, and its legs were adorned with gold bracelets set with gemstones. Its diet was premium beef, pastries, and wine mixed with honey. The priests, with boundless bravery or madness, would pry the crocodile's mouth open to stuff food in, or pour wine down its throat. Pilgrims came, bearing gifts for Lord Crocodile, and when this crocodile died, it was mummified with royal rites, buried in a stone sarcophagus, and another crocodile was selected to replace it. Thousands of mummified baby and adult crocodiles have been found, proving a culture that worshipped nature to the point of being willing to live with and serve the most dangerous predators. Finally, let's smash another Hollywood cliché. When watching movies about ancient Egypt, you always see characters riding camels across the desert. Camels in Egypt go together like bread and butter, right? Completely wrong. In reality, during the Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom, the eras when the Giza pyramids and the Sphinx were built, camels were virtually non-existent in Egypt. The main beast of burden of this era was the donkey. Millions of stone blocks for the pyramids were not transported by camels, but hauled by human power, oxen, and donkeys. Combined with the magical waterway system of the Nile, the dromedary camel only became popular in Egypt around the 7th century BC, long after the Great Pyramids had been standing there for 1,000 years. Putting a camel in a pyramid building scene is as wrong as making a movie about George Washington riding a Honda motorcycle. It is an anachronism that we have unwittingly accepted because it looks correct. The truth is, the pharaohs never saw a camel in their lives. They traveled by palanquin and boat, the Rolls-Royces of the ancient world, powered by wind and slave rowing. If you feel modern medicine is too specialized, with cardiologists, neurologists, dermatologists, then let's go back to ancient Egypt to meet a doctor with a job title that sounds painful. That is the shepherd of the anus of the pharaoh. Yes, you heard that right. This was an official and extremely high-ranking royal title, nary fight, in the Egyptian worldview. The anus was the second most important gateway of the body after the mouth, where waste was expelled, to keep the divine body of the king pure. Therefore, taking care of this back door was not the job of a lowly servant, but the responsibility of a top medical expert. The job of this gut pastor was mainly to administer enemas. They believed that pumping water and medicines into the rectum not only cured constipation, but also purified the soul and drove away evil spirits of disease. The more regularly the pharaoh went to the bathroom, the more prosperous the kingdom. So, next time you complain about your job, remember that back in the day, there were the most powerful men in the kingdom, whose only duty was to stare at the king's butt and ensure it functioned smoothly. But not everyone in Egypt enjoyed such deep care. Let's leave the palace for the village of Deir el-Medina, home to the tomb builders. Here, in the 12th century BC, under Ramses III, the first recorded strike in human history took place. You think strikes and protests for rights are inventions of modern democratic society? Wrong. Egyptian workers knew how to walk off the job. 10 years ago, the story began when the Egyptian economy tanked, and the government repeatedly delayed wages. Wages here, as mentioned, were barley, beer, cooking oil, and clothes. When bellies were empty, and officials only gave empty promises, the builders, who were respected artisans, threw their chisels and hammers to the ground and said, "Done. We aren't working." They marched off the construction site, walked to the mortuary temples of the kings, and just sat there. They shouted, "We are hungry. We are thirsty. We have no clothes, no oil, no fish, no vegetables." The event was so shocking that local officials panicked and had to scramble to bring pastries to soothe them. But after eating, they went back on strike until they were paid in full. The strike was a resounding success, proving that even under the most absolute monarchy, the power of united workers could still make the throne tremble. However, the fate of Egyptians after death is the funniest tragedy in history. They spent their whole lives mummifying themselves, building fortified tombs in hopes of eternal preservation. But ironically, the mummy's biggest enemy wasn't time, but Europeans from the 16th to 19th centuries. In the eyes of Europeans back then, Egyptian mummies weren't cultural heritage. They were medicine. A crazy fever called mumia swept through Europe. People believed that powder ground from ancient mummies could cure everything, from headaches and stomach aches to epilepsy. Arab traders robbed thousands of tombs, ground up the dried flesh and bones into powder, and sold it to Europe at exorbitant prices. King Francis I of France carried a packet of mummy powder with him everywhere. King Charles II of England even rubbed skull powder on his skin to absorb vital energy. Imagine the horrific insult. An Egyptian official spent his life preparing for eternal life, only to be ground up and drunk like a supplement by some British aristocrat. And that's not all. When the supply of mummy medicine was abundant, people used mummies as paint. A beautiful brown color called mummy brown is very popular with pre-Raphaelite painters. You could be admiring a masterpiece in the Louvre, unaware that the warm brown tone on that canvas is literally the crushed flesh and bone of an Egyptian. It wasn't until the 20th century that production stopped because they ran out of mummies to grind. The eternity the Egyptians craved eventually turned them into food and paint. For Western savages who considered themselves civilized to avoid tragic endings for their souls, ancient Egyptians equipped themselves with an ultimate weapon for the grave, the Book of the Dead. The name sounds terrifying, like a Hollywood horror movie, but in reality, this was a literal cheat sheet. Egyptians believed the journey to the afterlife was like an extremely difficult final exam. You had to pass monsters, answer riddles from gatekeeper gods, and finally, face the judgment of Osiris, where your heart was weighed against the feather of the goddess Manat Truth. If the heart was heavier than the feather due to sin, you would be eaten on the spot by the monster Ammit crocodile head, lion body, hippo butt. The soul would vanish forever. The second death, the true death. Therefore, the Book of the Dead was full of spells, passwords to open doors, and most importantly, template essays to bluff the court. It instructed the soul on what to say to deny guilt, called the negative confession. Instead of confessing I did good things, they had to say, I did not kill, I did not steal, I did not lie. This book was a commercial product. The rich bought the VIP Pro version, with beautiful illustrations and powerful spells, sometimes leaving the name blank to fill in later. The poor bought the budget version, scribbled by hand sometimes, full of spelling errors. In other words, even in the afterlife, money talks was still the truth. If you were rich, you could buy a premium cheat sheet to trick the gods and sneak into paradise. Finally, let's end this journey with a fact that proves the brutally practical mindset of Egyptians: condoms. Don't think only the HIV/AIDS era cares about safe sex. Ancient Egyptians crafted the first condoms in history, but not from rubber, since the rubber tree hadn't been discovered, but from linen. These ancient raincoats were made of fine linen soaked in olive oil, and sometimes dyed in colorful hues to distinguish social class. However, Their main purpose wasn't necessarily contraception, since they had crocodile dung for that, but to prevent tropical sexually transmitted diseases, which were rampant in the hot and humid Nile region. Additionally, it had a ritualistic aspect. A dyed linen condom was found in Tutankhamun's tomb, tied to the mummy's penis. As a delicate protective item, this shows how much they cherished reproductive ability and protected their little brother, even when crossing into the other world. Our journey to explore ancient Egypt pauses here. From deformed kings due to incest, to builders striking for beer. From proctologists to mummies ground into paint. Ancient Egypt emerges not as a silent museum, but as a vibrant, crazy, intelligent, and deeply flawed human society. They weren't gods stepping out of stone. They were people wrestling with life, death, disease, and belief in the most creative ways they could imagine. And it is those oddities, not the lifeless stones, that make them immortal. In the memory of humanity,